Well, good afternoon. Wonderful spring afternoon. I'm Wendy Luget, the University Librarian, and great to see so many of you here. We're welcoming you to the 7th annual Pancake Poetry event. 7, wow. Wonderful. This is an annual gathering founded in honor of librarian Marcia Pankake, who's with us this afternoon over there. Yes, yeah. So through the years, Marcia demonstrated quite an extraordinary love of poetry and presenting every year a special reading during this April Poetry Month. And when she retired, we continued that tradition and named it in her honor, which seemed only appropriate. So thank you, Marcia, for leading the way and helping us keep this going. I also want to recognize Malika Grant, who is back there, who's our librarian for English and African American Studies. She organizes this annual event. And also want to acknowledge Cecily Marcus. Is she here? Our curator. She's not here at the moment. She's our curator for the Upper Midwest Literary Archives, which includes a lot of poetry, too. And today's program is sponsored by the Friends of the University Libraries, and I know I see a number of our friends here, but if you're not a friend, we do have brochures out front, and we hope you'll think about joining us in the membership. The very first poet in the Pancake series was Jim Lenfesti, sitting right up front here, followed by Louis Jenkins, Hyde Erdrich, Ed Bach-Lee, Joyce Sutphin, Michael Dennis Brown. Truly an extraordinary roster being joined this year by Ray Gonzalez. Poet, essayist, and editor, Ray Gonzalez was born and raised in El Paso, Texas, and his work is inextricably linked to his Mexican ancestry and American upbringing in the deserts of the Southwest, and also in rock and roll music, and to mid-century American poets such as Robert Bly and James Wright. A longtime professor in the MFA Creative Writing Program, he's spoken about the importance of place in his work, and I'm going to quote here. I do not have to live in West Texas or southern New Mexico to shape new poems about my past life there, because the magical aspects of poetry have allowed me to bring the spirit of my home to Minnesota. Living in Minnesota has given me fresh perspectives about the area I came from. Perhaps my most powerful discovery in writing and teaching poetry in Minnesota is that all poets carry their homeland experience with them, no matter where they go. I've been struck by the beauty and evocative imagery revealed in the titles of his many books. For example, The Religion of Hands, Circling the Tortilla Dragon, Renaming the Earth, and Consideration of a Guitar. It's no surprise that Ray has been the recipient of numerous awards, including the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Southwest Border Regional Library Association. He's won the Minnesota Book Award 3 times and been a finalist numerous times for both poetry and memoir, and is a finalist this year for his latest work, Beautiful Walls. And now please join me in welcoming Ray Gonzalez, who will be reading from his new book. Ray?
Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. This is overwhelming to do a poetry reading in the middle of a school week is something else. Thank you all. I want to thank the Friends of the Library for putting this on every year, and especially Marcia, because I remember it was in the spring of 1998. I came here for my job interview. I'd been living and teaching in Chicago for a few years, and I thought that was winter. And I get here, and it's bitterly cold. And Marcia was one of the first people that I met during the campus interview and tour, and she gave me a tour of the library. So I'll never forget that. It's been 18 years. So thank you again. I am going to read mostly poems from the new book, but I changed a few things around. I've been talking and emailing with friends how, and sadly enough, and yet we go on with our poems, the fact that in the last couple of years, 2 or 3 years at least, we've lost many, many writers, many, many poets that have been both friends and poets who have been very influential. For me, the most recent just happened 2 or 3 weeks ago when Jim Harrison died. Wonderful novelist. I think in many ways, though, he was overlooked as a poet. Tremendous body of work as a poet, and I love his poetry, really more than his fiction, even though I've read every book of prose that he's written. One of the reasons I loved his poetry was that he lived part of the time in Montana and, of course, came from Michigan, but also lived in southern Arizona, which is one home area of my family. My family on my mother's side came from Arizona, and so Jim Harrison lived there for a number of years. So I want to begin the reading by reading a poem by Jim Harrison. We corresponded a couple of times about Arizona, and this poem by Jim Harrison is from his last book of poetry called Dead Man's Float. It's called Quarantine. I've been quarantined by the gods. Do no harm, they said. Tell no secrets. I had stored my spirit in the big willow tree to the west of my study on the advice of Rumi. It was getting badly bruised every day, and my spirit needed a resting place. I forgot where I put it when you should check it every morning. I sank lower and lower until one day I called it back from the tree, then wrote a pretty good poem. There is no time to fool around, the gods said. They blew my poem with the wind to the top of Antelope Butte. I can't walk there with my cane. Some gods have been dead 1,000 years and need our magic and music to come back to life. We owe it to them. They got us started. And I wrote a recent series of new poems for Jim Harrison. I'll read 2 of them. This first one's called Birds. It begins with a quote by one of his poems, in one of his poems. All I want to be is 1,000 blackbirds bursting from a tree, seeding the sky. The birds flew down and landed on the cactus. Their pain was God's. I lived in the desert as a small boy, though the canyons preferred an old man. I walked and birds became rattlesnakes drinking at the river because snakeskins must hang on my wall so I can finally grow up. There is a hot wind that erases footprints in the arroyo, birds pecking at the fruit of the cactus before flying beyond the saguaros. The rare thunderstorm sings over the mountains and takes more birds in the pouring rain. Who is that God that keeps washing my face in the great storm? The second poem mentions the fact that I use a cane now, and of course I forgot my cane. I forgot my cane today and hustling all these poems together. I was going to hold it up while I read this poem, and I forgot my cane. Oh, that's okay, thank you. Of course, when I get home, my wife's going to scold me for forgetting my cane. So this poem is called The Cane. I walk with a cane now, needing it after a bad fall. Jim Harrison used a cane to find birds on his walk, the stick of a one-eyed man who was as sharp as a hawk, though his spine failed and challenged him to move and make his way up the mountain. My cane is learning how to tap without disturbing anything. Maybe that is the problem. Harrison disrupted all things, sparrows, wrens, and hawks scrambling to get away from that tapping. The bird lover making progress up the hill, his cane holding him up again. The leg of the man shuffling to the sun that waited each evening to listen to the music of the king. I guess in keeping with what I said earlier about poets who have come and gone, of course, it's part of everything that we do, being here, writing our poems, and then moving on elsewhere, maybe to write poems there also. By now, it's been maybe 7 or 8 years ago, that there was a legal case over the remains of the great Spanish poet Federico Garcia Lorca, who was shot during the Spanish Civil War by Franco's fascists, and I believe it was in 1936. And he was dumped in an unmarked grave along with a couple of dozen other people. And somehow a legal case came up where people wanted to find out if his remains were really there. And the Garcia Lorca family fought it for a long time, and finally the judge ordered that the grave be opened. And of course, they didn't find anything that they could really prove that Garcia Lorca was there. A judge orders the opening of Federico Garcia Lorca's grave. Leave the dead alone. Federico is not with the other 18 bodies that were dumped there. Do not rewrite the myth. Federico is not there because his poem about the moon lifted him away long ago. No poet leaves bones as clues to where they must go. Do not open the earth. Federico emerged long ago and hid among the black trees to get away from the death song, the others slowly moving to the sound of his footsteps, their bodies stripped of possessions, while the murderers left a folded piece of paper in Federico's pants. Do not unfold it and read what they did not read, because Federico took the words off the bloody page and ran. He is gone and will not greet the shovels, because your law is not for tracing the saint. It is for entombing the written word. You will discover that poetry is not buried down there. And the new book opens with a couple of poems to important poets like Garcia, Lorca. The other one is Paul Salon. Also, he survived the Holocaust, but in the long run, he was also a victim of World War II when he decided he just couldn't do it anymore. Paul Salon's Ashes. Here's the hand in its shade of absolute and the study of grapes with bruises. If the river took the body, how did it burn? Here are constellations stained in the books, the sentence hidden from the truth. Executions painted on the sun as if what is here must be understood. If black hands reach for the sun, how do ashes mask the face of history? Here is the measure of the body, the rain that drips on what has been done. A greater telling vague with tongues. If stepping into the void is a cut flower, how does war leave so many survivors? Here is the healing hand on the throat, the good heart in its water spilled when things are finally understood. If the poem takes the soul, how does sound embrace it? If this is silence, how does the bird bend the tree? A friend of mine said one reason he writes a lot of poems about writers and poets who have come and gone and influenced and changed his life, changed his work, is that he doesn't want to deal with writing about his family. But sooner or later we have to. Patience. 3 weeks before I woke up, birds came to visit my father. When the birds alighted near his hair, I was his son, but he was already dead. I took his place because those sparrows, finches, and the cardinal came for me. 2 weeks before I woke up, the clay mask fell off the wall and shattered into tiny pieces, its two eyes becoming one deep hole in the floor. As I swept it up, the pain in my chest was severe. I lay down in a second bed because my father was in the first. 1 week before I woke up, I found I could sleep with a quiet rhythm among the waiting trees. When I opened my eyes, the dirt on the bed was mine, and the leather jacket hanging in the closet was my father's. Along with his writing about family, probably fill five books on the fact that I never really knew my father's family because that's the way they wanted. That's the way they wanted it, very secretive. On the other hand, my mother's side, anything you want to know, sit down. He's the writer, so he'll tell you everything. Of course, 5 different members of the family tell you 5 different versions of the same story. And then when the book comes out with information about the family, that didn't happen. You can't write about that. This is a poem in several parts and based on something that happened decades ago. And I finally put it together after doing some research on several Aztec gods and going back and relooking at things. So some of the sections begin with the specific name of an Aztec god. Gods in the attic. Cardboard box in my grandfather's house. Old man starving his kids. My father shining shoes on street corners at the age of 5. The old man dying 30 years ago. My rare visit allowed while others are gone. The stairs to the attic as dark as the reasons to keep away. No movement from the cobwebs. The box I rip open to find art prints of Aztec gods. Descriptions of each at the bottom reminding me I was taught pyramids are for destruction, not for getting to the other world. Someone saved these drawings to keep me climbing the stairs. 2. Huehue Coyote. God of music flying over the flames of the mother, drum beating until his heart falls in a river of feathers, a light with black diamonds tossed to the warriors to impregnate their women. Huehue Coyote releases the flowers because men born in this fertile period grow to become singers and storytellers. Huehue Coyote tossing colors as fragrant as the night. The priests claiming sons of the flower period would become overindulgent at the waterfall where the storytellers dove and were not seen again until someone finally wrote the truth. The two-headed figure of a man and a coyote, his power too alien for the text I have been writing for 50 years. When I set the print down, I hear a rustling in the corner, the dim light destroying what floats in the air. 3. Yamatakuto, goddess of the earth and death and the Milky Way, greets me with her spread legs, though the sun breached her universe before I came along. She is an aged woman with fleshless mouth, large bare teeth, and dressed in white. Yamakalute holds a shield and baton, and I have seen this woman in white before, known her in the story of the river, why her temple was known as the darkness when the locked ward of the mental hospital kept me for several days. Women in white wearing her seashells to tease me into getting well, the room making me doodle drawings of faces while I waited to get well. Yamatakuto appears in star skirt and the attic door closes, my trouble breathing making me set her down, the woman in white pointing to constellations, Sagittarius and Aruga. I pick up the drawing and she brushes my face with a poem of healing. Itzamana. God of writing wrinkled in the closet, Itzamana brings his screenfold book and drops it in my aching lap. His second role as a healer surprising me because I want to close the box and run away. My desire to fold the prints quickly passing, and I open the roll to allow Itzamana to walk to his writing stone, symbols revealing the lizard, reptile I knew as a child, the white lizards of my recurring dreams snowing on the picture of the writer kneeling over his stone. Tochipili. His vision is folding the sun into the secrets of my father's family that never allowed me to know them. Their silence clashing with Xochipilli, another patron of scribes, the last print of the codex he created made of hundreds of my failed poems. Old paper thrown away, weak lines I have laughed at, rejecting their unconvincing shadows. A cycle that demands I see what I should have faced a long time ago. Ceremonies no one will ever witness because Ocheliti traces a symbol that is mine alone. A few poems in a couple of earlier books. In keeping with that last poem, I slept in a cave. I slept in a cave and did not know where I was. Oh, it was important to see the light return to show me the exit. I slept in a cave and saw a fire in the heart, how it flickered away. I slept in a cave of dripping walls and listened to the water escape toward the entrance of my dream, where the faces of animals covered the bleeding ground. Men running away without taking in what they had spilled before me. The herds of yesterday becoming the angry hordes of tomorrow. I slept in a cave and learned to trace its walls with a will that remained invisible. It brought me closer to scraping my soul against the rocks to find I had always slept down there. I tried to wake when I rolled closer to the paintings, saw things I can't describe because my closed eyes had already seen what took place. How things were created underneath and not from above, because many men already slept up there, away from creation and what it sheltered inside the mountain. I slept in a cave and grew into an old man wise with eyesight and dumb with my hands, a blind man wanting to feel his way out of the dark tunnel that his mother opened when she screamed upon his birth. Been doing some research besides the poets I've already mentioned, and this has taken place for years and years on the surrealists, including Salvador Dali, who, in my opinion, was a better writer than a painter. One of the surrealists that I have trouble with. This is a quote from one of his long, very strange essays. Salvador Dali. The apparition of a white hair at the bottom of my glass appeared to me to be a good omen. I felt ideas and ideas being born and vanishing. This is my first white hair. This was the elixir of a long life. The white hair. The white hair appears as a sign to another life, and you are living it. The hair is the musical note of destiny, white line between desire and fulfillment, the border between having what you want and reconstructing the shadow of what you could never possess. The white hair at the bottom of the clay jar was dropped by an old woman who used to love you, but is now shedding longer hair in the cups of men who do not want her. Did she drop it as a warning? The hair traces the opening to heaven, makes you balder as it fills your jar with things you do not know. The white hair of a long life belongs to someone who whispers, "Come to me, I am here." Yet the white hair you abruptly notice hanging off your lips is a nuisance you pull off with a shrug as you drink from your jar and let go, the white hair disappearing as it hits the floor. There's some poems, 2 or 3, throughout the reading, said in my good friend's house, one of my best friends in northern Colorado. And this happened on the first day of the last time I went up there to visit. Hummingbird on the porch. Suddenly it hovered a couple of feet in front of my face, tiny black head on white body, buzzing like a god choosing to accept me. Seconds going by as the hummingbird floated there, close to my face, the air of its wings brushing me as if I finally deserved it. During the same trip, we went into the forest around the Padre River in northern Colorado. And he showed me a tree where there were several horns stuck in the branches way high above. And I think higher than maybe a person could put up there themselves without a ladder or trying to climb up the tree. The tree wasn't that big. So I really don't know exactly where they came from, but I wrote this poem. Antlers in the tree, Livermore, Colorado. The Padre River called me south, so I removed my horns and stuck them high in the tree by the dirt road. If you don't believe this and laugh, then I admit I saw an animal rub itself against the trunk, shedding its horns to brighten the branches. I wanted to, but I claimed a place under the shade of a tree decorated with horns, bone branches that belong there so we can look up and dream we truly know all about it. Perhaps the horns had been lodged for too long and might become an extension of limbs the tree was missing when the animal stopped there, grazed for a second, then entered the tree for the last time, pushing and pulling, stomping its hooves into lock horns until they gave way. The river called me south, and I pulled 2 antlers from the highest fork, never looked back because other horns were embedded there, points from a stillness sharper than the ever-changing tree. Another writer, also from the Southwest, was the wonderful Evan Canal. Another writer who's also been overlooked, even though he had his claim to fame with Son of the Morning Star, probably the best book that I've read on George Custer and A Little Bighorn. But Evan Canal also wrote wonderful novels and especially essays, set all over the world, was a historian, an amazing, amazing writer. A couple of poems I'm going to read based on his work have to do with 2 book-length poems. The first one is The Compass Rose, and the other one, long title, Notes Found in a Bottle on the Beach at Big Sur, I believe. And long, long poems, but what makes it amazing is he finds very unusual details from history, long forgotten or overlooked details that people don't know. This is called, again, after Evan Canal. Olmecs from the Mesoamerican civilization created ceramic figurines of dogs running on wheels, tied to their feet by wooden axles, similar to those found in Mesopotamian tombs. It is believed the skill of a water diviner comes from an area in the elbow whose veins connect to the paranormal. I was afraid, so I sat down again. The dirt was warm, but it was there. A dove was seen flying from Joan of Arc's mouth a few seconds before she was killed, though you can't find a bare female foot in Chinese art because its artists can depict nakedness but cannot touch the female foot. I was concerned, so I rose to my knees. The dirt had crude lines drawn into it. It has been determined that the church does not take any action against the priest who has gone mad. A Roman tombstone near Antibes tells of a 12-year-old visitor from the north who danced and gave pleasure to many. I didn't understand, so I rose to my feet again. The dirt turned to glass, and I thought I could see. When the first Europeans arrived in the Aztec nation, its people were already revolting against repression. Bands of them arming themselves for war and sacrifice, willing to help the invaders burn the city down. The pacifist Mohandas Gandhi's corpse was transported to his funeral on a gun carriage. I finally saw what it was and followed the trail. The walls crumbled and I left my handwriting there. My friends from Colorado went through the long agony of breast cancer. His wife went through the whole experience, and now she's fine. So I also wrote this poem the last time I visited in Colorado. Burning Breast for George and Mary Ann. The cancer of history is married to the river that stole dark sediment from the earth. The trail to desire moving from body to body, marking the breast with a kiss from a lover who bent down to listen. What he heard smoldered for a lifetime until the courage was found to smear mud from the river onto the burning breast. When it hurt, the music changed. When it began to heal, the mud body twisted in the light not seen since their days began. A torch hidden in gratitude and weeping, its wet flame flickering alive. The cancer is the hourglass of the elements, each grain made to lift the torso and set it down again. When the body rests, the sand blows away. When the second body washes at the river, the forest surrounding a charred house lies down and listens to the moon. The new book also has a series of poems about my 23-year-old nephew, now been gone 7 years. He was a veteran of the Iraq War. Wrote a series of poems about it. I'll read one of them. The Sacred Fire. The soldier returning from the war is a boy displaced into leaf-green water by a shape that appeared without warning. The breeding of those who never returned. Ammunition belts worn around the orphaned heart. The orphan's actually his parents staring at an army helmet next to a funeral casket. My nephew Tony told his mother how he drove his Humvee over an Iraqi child as an act of survival. Then he came home. The moon rose to be placed in Tony's mouth during his funeral. My sister's house filled with his pictures. He died after his PTSD was out of control, dozens of medications killing him, benefits held up. A woman army general assuring his mother his country would help all veterans to get well. When I couldn't write about this for a long time, howling wind brought snow, and a black cat came to our front door. Neighbors letting it out at night. Our cat looked through the window, and the two stared at each other before the black cat left. My sister says her son is with God, and I want to write about God, but it is snowing and the white walls melt in a rare sun. The abstraction of God helping me gain distance between history and what I will never understand. Drawn by a finger in the desert sand, the route of invasion is as clear as the day my writing finally returned. There are words under the folded flag and shrapnel that will rewrite the books. A mist hangs outside as I face this, my ideas avoiding the cemeteries. And the river has never been a part of this. When I gaze across the peaceful mountains, I whisper to a child who is going to survive. Change of pace. Good old rock and roll. I could write 2 or 3 books about rock and roll, which I've been working on, and it's not that easy to write about popular culture. I have found. 2 Bob Dylan poems. 17-year-old Robert Zimmerman attends a Buddy Holly concert in Duluth, Minnesota, January 31st, 1959. In 3 days, Buddy Holly will die in a plane crash in a frozen Iowa cornfield. But tonight, Bobby Zimmerman is in the front row, watching his hero sing Peggy Sue, That'll Be the Day, and other songs Bobby tries to pound on the old piano in the Hibbing High Auditorium, sneaking in when he can. Later, Bobby will share to his friends that Buddy Holly looked right at him and waved at the end of Peggy Sue. Buddy Holly shouts, "Good night, Duluth," as the lights come on, the kid jumping up and down as cheers resound from northern Minnesota to Iowa. Imagine Bob Dylan at one of Buddy Holly's concerts. The cliches about the torch being passed, though the kid doesn't really know what took place. Music and oncoming death. Songs starting in Duluth at night when Bobby stepped into the freezing air. 2 friends he brought, not saying much because they are thinking about Holly, an icy drive back home. "Buddy was great," Bobby keeps repeating. "Yeah," one mutters. "Open the door, I'm freezing," the other yells, and yanks on the locked car door, the crowd passing by. Imagine Bob Dylan driving his parents' car from Hibbing to Duluth to see Buddy Holly and the journey home. The kid taking his time unlocking the doors, gazing at the crowd, his cold hands in his pockets because his fingers are on fire. And an earlier Dylan poem based on just like Tom Thumb's Blues, set in El Paso and Juarez, my hometown, and the city right across the border. If I could find it. Wrong book. Don't ever try to do a reading with 4 or 5 books up on here, and even my list doesn't help. Bob Dylan in El Paso, 1963. Bob Dylan passed through my hometown to cross into Juarez, Mexico. He used the Stanton Street Bridge that arched over the river and led to the red lights. When he sang, "They got some hungry women there and they'll really make a mess out of you," my buddies and I knew the place, the high school ritual of having to go there to find Dylan in his shadow going upstairs. Dylan must have had his breakfast somewhere in El Paso because you could never cross without a good set of huevos and tortillas churning inside you, ready to explode in the sunrise colors of a frontier dream. Dylan sang, "When you're lost in the rain in Juarez and it's Easter time too," and I searched for the mission where he might have knelt and prayed, entered to find statues of saints draped in dark colors like a waiting concert stage. But wasn't he Jewish? Yes, because all men going into the Juarez night have to kneel down sooner or later. Dylan sang, "I started out on Burgundy, but soon hit the harder stuff. And I bought a bottle of mezcal in Juarez for him. The worm at the bottom of the round jar still there after 45 years. The black liquid churning dreams Dylan had when he entered the cave, the name of the legendary cantina, etched on tamale leaves Dylan left on his plate. Bob passed through my hometown after he left Juarez. His shadow is still there, appearing every now and then in profile on the mountains surrounding the town. The only El Pasoans who know it is him, growing fewer in number, because the raven has taken many of them away. Though there is a rumor the cave is still open for business, the women waiting, the most popular bedroom, half paradise, half museum, because one of the dirty adobe walls has writing in faded lipstick that says, "Zimmerman was here." And the final sequence. Another poem based on Evan Cannell's long poems. And of course, this mentions the fact that the first atomic bomb was set off 150 miles north of El Paso, a few months before the first ones were dropped on Japan. My parents were in high school, and they said that they saw this flash of light in the night sky, and nobody knew what it was until after the war, when more things were revealed. This is called Lies. Etruscans used volcanic rock to personify their deities, and they soon crumbled. This imperfection changed history until you stood there studying your ashen hands. By staring at your fingers, you made sure the guilty were not forgotten. Many souls are invisible, but we are too destructive to believe they are really there. No one has determined why the legend says it is appropriate for a beautifully gowned lady to water a peony, or why a winter plum should be tended by a silenced monk. In this mild winter of no snow, the magnolia in the backyard is starting to blossom. If the day freezes, it can die. If it stays warm, the little girl in a light sweater can gather the blossoms and talk to the sun. The scientist Robert Oppenheimer concluded scientists who set off the first atomic bomb 150 miles north of El Paso committed eternal sin. His teacher disagreed, claiming science does not determine sin because science is not a great fire with clouds, merely a fact. Oppenheimer was there, crouching in the fire wind, goggles aflame. People lied every day after it was revealed unknown plants sprouted from Nazi bomb craters in London, and this was kept secret to not reveal that explosions create the seeds and the genes of pollens. Is this worth proving, or does lyric simplicity reign and shadows that light the sun win by day's end? Even the surviving melons in the garden have something to say about this, their skins changing color in the warm air that will not welcome winter until people quit lying and start running across the shallow rivulets of their creative tears. Can a blind man sense unnatural faces people paint over their natural expressions? If so, there might be fewer liars. But the boy who crosses the street is stronger than the boy who hides behind the tree, waiting for the army ants to start fighting. He must know mummified Peruvian llamas in Paracan graves had 5 toes instead of the usual 2. Oppenheimer, did you lie? The white desert is still there, the white mountains eroding without you, their white rocks resembling the withered wreaths uncovered every time Egyptian tombs of gold and diamond-lined skeletons are excavated. Riches protecting the ancient dead, hands of an uncovered boy sculpted in gold, his eyes in obsidian, the withered wreath the only thing moving as it senses the warm air of the opened earth. And 3 more poems. Bald eagle north of Shelby, Montana. We spotted from 100 yards away our car throwing dust across the dirt road. The huge eagle perched atop a telephone pole. Empty prairie and distant mountains bringing us closer, the bald eagle waiting for us. The bird grows larger as sunlight flashes across the wires, a message reaching us in the middle of nowhere, the closest town 80 miles away. Yellow fields empty of trees, and the eagle must have a place to go when it lifts and spreads. Years ago, I found a dead hawk on my trek through Cochito Canyon, came upon it sweaty and out of breath, the valley below opening like a green blanket, the brown and white feathers of the hawk bristling with ants that carried its secret into the earth. When we returned home from Montana, I couldn't see it clearly. When I thought about what it was, the empty road stayed that way. When I looked again, getting nearer the eagle was only a moment on a dirt road. It was the hiker staying in the canyon to practice the story of the eagle and the hawk so he could descend. That day near Shelby, I slowed the car and dust covered us in a cloud. The eagle sprang off the wires, its wings shadowing the car, rising beyond our sight. Pebbles on the gravel road ringing against our vehicle as we moved. I left the dead hawk in the canyon those many years past. Haven't told anyone its tiny head was gone. The mutilated hawk visited me in a dream where I paused and turned into the trees, calling myself names someone called me long ago. Those wings ascending in a different light because the road to the eagle has always been there. One poet who's still pretty much alive as far as I know is the great Chilean poet Nicanor Padre, who by now must be 103, 104. There's pictures of him in the news at least once a year, and the old guy keeps going and keeps disrupting poetry. Many people claim that he was a greater poet than Pablo Neruda, a very different kind of poet though than Neruda. think when I wrote this poem, he was 102. Nicanor Padre. Someday the great white hair of the poets will be a sign the streets have turned. The 102-year-old poet will stop in the middle of the path, hold up his left hand and cry, "The confluence of the hands is divine. Get your long hair out of your eyes." Padre will not ask you to cut it because his poems foretell of a prophet in search of poets with long white hair. Those ropes from heaven cut on the day he wrote his first poem. The penance for writing being an eternal sentence of white letters, syllables, and clouds older than the one who stands in the middle of the road, directing heaven to consider its invisible alphabet. And the last poem. Two hawk skies in Minnesota. A hawk flies over my house in the rain, landing on the huge alder in the back where it took a squirrel weeks ago. Its wings vanishing in the rain as if they were never there, the black line of flight escaping from my thoughts. It brought back Robinson Jeffers' hurt hawks, where he tried to mend the broken wing of a bird that hated him in silence, Jeffers releasing it by the sea to heal itself. A hawk flew over my house, and I wanted to find movement in the trees, but their dripping leaves left a bright entrance where low clouds drifted as something else. The hawk in the rain, as mute as Jeffers admitting it was really men he hated, the war years wrinkling his face, the agony of pushing rocks that built his house the way I collect wet leaves in my hands when I am met by a cold mist that has something to do with my freedom and the bird that bristles overhead. 2. It is better to be wrong and watch the hawk cross the snowfield in a black second, its wings sharp as the eye that waits for tomorrow's words. It is nothing new, how it flies farther away until I can't see where I am going, the highway blinded by snow. Filaments of passion pointing away from the nearest fog, the moment the fox darts across the road and I close my eyes and make a wish. It is better to pay attention to the chevron flight of geese forgotten when the pines fall into themselves, a grove of them mistaken for a place to hide, the hawk reappearing overhead when I get out of the car, shiver in the wind as I wait for the arrival of what will save me. Thank you. I think we have time for some questions. If anybody has any questions, comments, criticism, anything? Yes.
So, pardon my ignorance, I do not know this poet Para from Chile.
Oh, yeah.
And have you translated them, or
No, but there's New Directions has a couple of translations. There's a selected poems, 2 or 3 others. Some of the early ones might be out of print, but New Directions has a selected poems. Yeah, worth looking up. Other questions? Quiet crowd. Yes?
Do some or many of your poems come from your dreams?
Very, very, very few, because if you write them down and you look at them later, they're not always good material for poems. Dreams usually aren't. You either have to lie a lot or make something up to add to the dream. So not really, not really. Other questions? Yes?
on the same order? Do your poems come from the outdoors?
Do they come from the outdoors? Many of them do, especially older ones that I wrote about the Southwest. And I go down there at least once a year and go hiking around the desert. And I don't write them immediately while I'm there, but later on they images and I guess, I don't know, the power of the landscape comes back and gets me writing again. And now I'm doing more Minnesota poems. There are a few in the book, so getting there. Fewer desert poems and more snowfield poems. Other questions? Yes?
How do you rank Bob Dylan as a poet?
He's not a poet, he's a songwriter, which is one of the biggest arguments and discussions we have in my literature of rock and roll class that I do every couple years. And half the class, yes, always a poet, yes, yes. The other half, no, he's just a rock and roll, I could go on and on about that, but that's a big argument. And I think he's a songwriter, and most of all, he's the biggest con artist in the history of pop culture. He knows how to stay ahead. He knows how to stay ahead of the crowd. That's why he survived to write, great songs. He's a con artist, which is what rock and roll is all about. Poetry and rock and roll. Yes. Yes.
Do you have favorite places now in Minnesota that draw you? So you'd love to go there.
Yeah. I live down in the southern suburbs, Apple Valley, Lakeville, and there's some good areas like going down towards Northfield and Faribault in that area. They're really nice down towards Rochester. I know everybody loves, northern Minnesota, but there's some really wonderful places farther south. Yeah. Other questions?
Well, if there are no other questions, we do have a reception out front. And Ray will be there with his new book, which you can purchase, and if you'd like an autograph, he will be doing that as well. So thank you again all for coming. See you again next year, I'm sure. And thank you to our wonderful.
Thank you.